How we doing, folks? My guest today is going to be Colorado Snowsports Hall of Famer Scott Rawles. Scott had a standout career as an athlete and an even better one as a coach in the sport of freestyle mogul skiing. As a professional mogul skier, Scott finished with 7 career wins, 20 podiums, and 5 top 3 finishes in the overall standings on the World Pro Mogul Tour. Scott then transitioned to coaching, helping develop Team Breckenridge Freestyle, starting as a moguls coach working under John Dowling and eventually becoming program director. During his time at Team Breck, he had 14 athletes qualify for the US Freestyle Ski Team. Speaking of US Freestyle Ski Team, Scott then transitioned to coaching the US Freestyle Ski Team for 14 years, starting as an assistant and then working his way up and becoming the head coach of the Moguls program. And in this episode today, we go through and talk about Scott's career. We talk about the competitiveness as an athlete, and we talk about transitioning and that journey in coaching. We touch on Scott's big passions. One, of course, skiing, and the other, helping people and helping them reach and achieve their best. During Scott's time with the US team, he helped multiple athletes achieve personal bests and some of the biggest dominance sports ever seen and the US has ever seen. During Scott's time with the US team, they had 7 Olympic medals, 20 medals at world championships, 4 different world champions in moguls and dual moguls. Some of the legends of the sport have been helped and taught and guided by Scott. From Jeremy Bloom, Toby Dawson, Hannah Carney, Shannon Barkey, Brian Wilson, to Travis Mayer, Travis Cabral, Nate Roberts. It really is a laundry list. I could go on all day about all the different athletes that Scott's helped over the years. It really is crazy when I was going through and looking at notes and the names that he's helped and coached and guided through their careers. It was a lot of fun to have this conversation, and I really hope you folks enjoy this episode. Thanks.
Sounds great.
There it is.
Okay.
Scott,
All right.
thank you so much for coming on and taking the time. I really appreciate it. I've been really looking forward to this one, as we just touched on before we came on. This is a big honor for me. As like an athlete kind of coming up, especially freestyle, like mogul nerd, and you're like one of the nicest, laid back, amazing people, through the sport and everything else. But still, like when you're one of those younger guys coming up, you're like, oh my God, that's the head coach for the ski team. Like, oh, I wonder what he thinks about my skiing. I wonder what he thinks about this. Oh, don't say the wrong thing. And like, so super excited to get to have the time to get to do this.
No, I appreciate you having me on, and yeah, I'm still like I'm not active internationally anymore necessarily, but I still follow it, still pay attention to what's going on, and yeah, it's an amazing tribe and family we're part of, you know.
No, definitely. It's a small, tight-knit community, but also it's super strong too, those bonds. And unfortunately, we just did a little celebration of life for Shane Cordeau, who passed away, and really unfortunate, and knew Shane since I was, 9, my second ski event ever. And it was really cool to see that kind of freestyle community come together for that. And a lot of faces you hadn't seen in a while, but just to come in and it was much more. We hardly really even talked about the skiing. It was brought up a little bit, but it was just more about that community kind of coming together and everything else. And so
Yeah,
yeah, it was really special.
I'm really glad you brought Shane's name up. So I was hoping we'd be able to talk about him today. I was fortunate enough to be able to coach him a number of years with the US team, and I've obviously known his mom and dad for a long time. And my condolences definitely go out to them. And what a great guy! Like Shane he was the best. He really was. He, like very unique individual, unique not only in his skiing but in how he approached life. And yeah, he will be greatly missed in our family.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, character would be an understatement. Definitely had an amazing personality for sure, and just awesome person. But when I was doing some of the research for you and for some of this, kind of segues into being unique and awesome and that kind of background. I mean, kind of talk a little bit about how you got into the sport of freestyle. You know, originally from Montana, you kind of made your way down, and the nickname Banana Man, which I had actually not heard until I had, started doing some of the research for this. So I'm really excited for you to share some of that with us.
Well, I was super fortunate to really grow up with a skiing background. My mom and dad, I'm originally from Libby, Montana, and my parents helped build a local ski area there called Turner Mountain, which is actually still there. And it originally was built in 1960, and it had a
Wow.
mile-long T-bar.
Wow.
And I've been was super fortunate to be around the sport right from the beginning. We moved to Washington State when I was about 9 years old, and um, grew up skiing at Crystal Mountain, Stevens Pass, Alpental. There's some great skiing in Washington, and then moved to Breckenridge in 1979, and was you know I knew skiing was in my blood and wanted to get out there and do it. And the whole Banana Man thing started. I bought a jean trench coat for 25 cents at a yard sale that was jean and it had bananas all over it. And I started skiing in it all the time, and boom, like that, I became the Banana Man. So it was super fun. That was a wild, wild time to be in Colorado, and particularly to be in Breckenridge, and just so many characters, so many great people in that amount of time. And during that time, I started meeting some local people who were really into mogul skiing. I had really been into it before that, because just watching it growing up on Wide World of Sports was kind of my first introduction to seeing what freestyle was about, or
Hmm.
what was going on with that. And Jack Taylor, like some of the big names in moguls, Scott Brooksbank, Wayne Wong,
Hmm.
like that's when all those guys kind of came into my view anyway. And
Okay.
so when I moved to Colorado, it was I just skied for one full year and hung out, or was hanging out with some guys, Mike Young, um, some people that you probably didn't really know about. But then the first time I competed, was the first time I met Stu O'Brien and Greta,
Hmm.
and a lot of those people who had been, at that time the sport was kind of just getting traction in FIS.
Yeah.
So there had been pro tours, and there had been some stuff like that. And actually, the first year I competed was 1980, 81, um, and it was called the Saab Pro Mogul Tour. And some of the people who were representing the U.S. came back and skied the last couple of events that year. And that included Frank Bedore and Bruce Bolesky, who's still a coach. And
Hmm.
so that kind of really got me rolling in the whole thing. And then it just kind of grew from there in terms of my participation, and that whole side of it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Now, that's one of the things I'm always really curious about and try to pull out, like because it's kind of still trying to find its way and everything else. And I mean, the Pro Tour was a big deal back then, and you had multiple different kind of Pro Tours kind of going before there was one towards the tail end, like mid 90s. I mean, Joey Cordeau, when I had him on, was kind of explaining that you had, one weekend might be that Saab Pro Tour, and then there was a different one, maybe more in the East Coast, and it was kind of three or four different things you could kind of jump on and do rather than, as you said, didn't have that much traction with FIS yet. So World Cup was kind of its own separate thing, and just kind of try and paint that picture because it's hard for me to, as long as I've been in, it's just been, World Cup Tour, and that's what you're trying to make. They had a little bit of bumps and jumps there that they tried to do in like kind of made it through to the I don't early 2000s.
Right.
Hmm.
Because I think that at the time that I started, there was a couple. There was a tour in Utah. Al Johnson was running that, and then there was
Okay.
this other tour in this Saab tour. There were some stops back east, and then that was the coolest thing. Like the last two stops of the year were at A Basin, which was right by where I lived,
Hmm.
and they gave away a turbo Saab to the winner that year. and Joey Cordell won that car, and they actually drove it up to the base of Slalom Slope where the event was, and I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I was just like, I'm not really going to do the, um, because at that time, like USSA and everything was just kind of starting to get going. There wasn't really that much going on. And I was like, well, why am I going to go spend money and not make money? And
Right.
then I saw that car and I was like, oh my God, you can win cars doing this.
Yeah.
And so that sort of spurred that on. And then as it sort of progressed, like Mike Closure from Vail was producing events called the World Pro Mogul Tour, and they had a lot of events mostly in Colorado, and there was still some events in Utah and stuff. And then
Hmm.
that sort of morphed into, um, by the end of the Pro Mogul Tour, it was the Bud Mogul Tour, which, both my brother and my brothers Kirk and Mike were really involved in
Hmm.
at that point. And that was more kind of late '90s, and that was kind of when things were starting to get momentum again. Not just with the Pro Mogul Tour, but with FIS um, and moguls and aerials being, demonstration events in Calgary, and then moguls actually becoming a medal event in Albertville.
Hmm.
And I think that's really what, once it reached that point in it became a lot bigger deal with the Olympics and people striving to get to the Olympics. And there had been, FIS had World Cup worldwide for a long time,
Hmm.
and World Championships and all that stuff. But once it was actually exposed to the world in Albertville, that was a big change for everybody and everything that was going on. Because at that point, or before that, and even in the mid '80s, early '80s, there weren't very many, freestyle programs.
Right. Sure.
There just weren't. There weren't places to go and train coaches. There just weren't coaches. There just wasn't a system in place. And once it became part of the FIS family, that really changed. That changed a lot in
Hmm.
terms of being able to, for athletes and skiers to be able to go and join a program that was organized, that had progressions that you could actually go through. And basically, my coaching career started in, 1989. It
Hmm.
was, my wife Jackie and I, we were blessed with having our son Zach that year, and I had to get a job. So, and I was like, well, what am I going to do here? Because I've been living in Breck. Jackie and I lived in a log cabin on Main Street in Breckenridge. It was just wood heat, and
Hmm.
my rent was $58 a month for 8 years.
Wow. Wow.
And that really was the ski bum life. And it was like, but at that point, like I needed to step up and sort of, get a real job. And that
Sure.
wasn't necessarily a real job per se, but I was lucky enough that year that, Team Breckenridge actually started a freestyle program. And so I applied to be the head coach for that, and I didn't get that job, but John Dowling did. And
Mm.
the director of the club at that time, Jim Reinig, he essentially made John take me and be an assistant coach.
Hmm.
And that's what really spurred my whole coaching career and everything. Because he had been coaching back at Carabasset Academy in Maine, moved out here, got that job, and that's what really kickstarted my coaching career. And my coaching career would have been nothing like it was without John Dowling, without a doubt.
Very cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I
Did it?
and John and I, we worked together for 10 years,
Mhm.
and then he ended up going to be the head coach in Canada, I believe, and it was probably 1998, something like that. So
Right. Yeah. After, because I think that's when Jean-Luc finished fourth, and Canada didn't walk away with any medals. And I think Peter and those guys were the head then, and then they kind of turned over, and John went in.
well, it was actually Des.
Right. Right.
Des was the head mogul coach through
Yep.
that whole time with John Luke and all those great skiers out of there and everything. Um, so that was kind of my path into coaching, and at that point I was skiing Pro Mogul Tour a little bit,
Hmm.
more part-time stuff, and still did some events after that and everything. But
Gotcha.
that was kind of the evolution of my ski career with that. And we were fortunate enough to be able to have some great athletes come through our program. It started off with, we had some skiers come from Killington, Evan Dibvig, Alex Wilson, and then, Luke Westerland, and then, homegrown talent Jeremy Bloom
Hmm.
came up through our program and stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you guys were kind of the dominant program, and then I mean, you had I think like 14 athletes qualify for the U.S. team during kind of that run there with you and John in the mid 90s. I mean, you guys were churning out. It was kind of known that was where you wanted to go, at least at that time period. I mean, you guys were putting athletes on the ski team kind of left
Yeah,
and right.
no, we were, and I think back about that, Toby Dawson, like
Hmm.
there were some big hitters that we were fortunate enough to be able to coach, and that came out of our program and went to US Team Olympics, and had a lot of success with all that stuff.
Hmm. Now, do you think like during that time period, as you start to get into coaching and you talk, that's kind of the breakthrough, right? Programs kind of start to get developed because it's finally in the Olympics and it's going to be a real event. So then Breck and some of those other places, I mean, in Killington, I know has always been like a mogul kind of mecca, and some of those other kind of pillar programs that are still around, kind of standing the test of time as the sport's kind of grown and everything. But what would you say was part of that success then, where you guys really just had athletes kind of rolling for that stretch there.
Well, I think it sort of started off, we were just really a fledgling program, just getting going really.
Yeah.
And then we had a few athletes move out from Killington, like our second year, and that sort of changed the focus of it a little bit, because we had
Okay.
Ellen Shields, Chris Tamburini,
Hmm.
Ryan Pyle, some of that crew, and then the word kind of spread back to Evan and Alex and some of those other guys, and they were like, okay, it sounds like there's a good thing going on in Breckenridge. And so I think a lot of it had to do with we some of our athletes had some success,
Hmm.
and then other people jumped on that train. And once you get a big push for not just one or two people, but a bunch of people wanting to have success and wanting to be able to push each other, not only just in training and competition and everything else, then as a coach, that's an amazing thing to part of and be able to guide that. But a lot of that is just athlete driven, because
Sure.
people are like, wow, those guys are, and at that point you couldn't flip. There wasn't, that whole side of it. But, those guys are, people are looking at other athletes on our team, and they're going, wow, they're throwing 720s, they're doing heli X's, stuff that was just kind of coming on board,
Sure.
been around, but it was like becoming a little bit more on board and a little bit more, the progressions were starting to advance.
Yeah.
And in Rocky that time, we had Jimmer was coming up, Jim Moran, like,
Hmm.
there was just a lot of good push in the sport. And I think that's what really pushed people to get better, and, eventually make the US ski team.
Hmm. So through that period, I mean, obviously you have a lot of success. It has to be really nice to see. I mean, in '98, Alex Wilson wins the Gold Cup, so he makes the Olympics, and then obviously you have Divig and Jimmer. They have to sue to be able to get their right
Right.
to go to '98, but they're there as well. And so, I mean, to be able to kind of see some of your athletes, and that's really the first, big showing for them at the Olympics. And do you kind of see yourself staying at Breckenridge? I mean, obviously you go over take the director role after John kind of moves on. Do you see yourself there, or do you have aspirations of like, no, I want to, I mean, be the head coach for the US ski team eventually? I mean, kind of how does that start to play out for you?
Well, I think that, at that point, like when I started, I didn't really have aspirations that it was going to end up turning into what it did.
You were
And
just getting a real job.
yeah, I was just kind of getting a real job, and I was getting to ski a lot. And I mean, to this day, I love to ski. Like it's
Mhm.
like I have a huge passion for it, and that allowed me still to be able to pursue that passion and still and do it in sort of a different form, being a coach and everything. And then I think that as in '98 that sort of started changing a little bit just because we had put so many athletes on the team, and I was still helping out those guys, quite a few of those guys, a lot.
Yeah.
And it was, and then like in '99, or like I ran the program in '98, '99, and at that point we were starting over a little bit, but
Hmm.
Toby made the team at that point, and then so I had a lot of connections still there, and was still helping those guys out a lot. And I believe it was in '99 or whatever. Alex Wilson asked me to come out to Heavenly and private coach just for a week to help him out there.
Hmm.
And I went out and he won the event. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. Like whatever it might be as far as that side. And then the next year, I got a call to be D Williams' assistant on the NORAMs.
Okay.
So, and at that point, it was D and Liz and Donnie were and Flash were all basically the main people at the U.S. team on the mogul side of it. And so that year, I was able to. I think it was actually I worked NORAMs 1999, 2000, but I also went to the World Cup in there was a World Cup in maybe one of the first World Cups in Deer Valley actually,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
and which was a big deal.
Hmm.
That was like wow, Deer Valley's doing this, and I think that at that point Salt Lake had gotten they'd either gotten the bid or was close to getting the bid for the Olympics in 2002, and then there was also another World Cup at Sunday River that year, and I was able to go to those events, and so I started to sort of integrate a little bit more in with what the U.S. team was doing, and then the next year they gave me the call and wanted me to be a World Cup coach, so it was.
Very
It
cool.
sort of was a natural progression, just because I was super familiar with the athletes and was more familiar with the system at that point.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah. No, I remember, yeah, it was not had to be 99 2000 because I think Cabral won in like 99 sprint, and US Nationals was at Deer Valley, and it had been announced that
Yes.
it was coming up. So then the next year I was at that World Cup in 2000, January 2000, for Deer Valley. So yeah, no, I remember it well. I have that poster in my garage. I'm pretty sure you're in it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I have that team picture in the garage. So that's
Right.
super cool. So is it good? So D kind of gives you the call. You kind of know you're familiar with those a lot of those athletes because you've helped kind of put them on the team, and then going into what would you say was that big change in dynamic, kind of going from that program level, kind of then your NORAMs up into more kind of World Cup and getting some of those experiences.
Well, I would just say, I mean, it was a huge step up to be going from even NORAMs to being on World Cup full time because it was like, wow, this is the real deal.
Hmm.
Just in terms of the level of skiers, everything else. Because I'd been fortunate enough to be able to like we hosted World Cup in Breckenridge for almost 10 years,
Hmm.
and so I'd seen like a lot of the skiers would come every year. And actually, that was a huge benefit to our program because a lot of our athletes we not only helped build the World Cup course there, but they got to train next to, all the World Cup
Right.
guys coming to town. Edgar Groperone, Nelson Carmichael, like Jean-Luc, like all the big guns were coming into our basically into our backyard, and so I'd been exposed to that, and I was just like, man, this is so amazing just to be able to see these guys, and then to be able to take that next step myself, and not only see those guys ski but have my guys ski against them,
Sure.
and be able to kind of work up into that system was, I mean, it was super, it was an amazing experience for me to be able to to do that, and that probably kept me even more driven to be able to improve my coaching, like to kind of take my stuff to the whole next level of it.
Hmm. No, absolutely. So who, like back then, I mean, who at the time were you most, I guess, learning from as you're trying to learn those roles and everything else? Are you mostly getting insight from Donnie and Flash and kind of learning through that? Or are you talking to JD, John Dowling, and kind of getting some insight from his time with the team, or like because it
Some
is
from
that small
JD, like
community.
probably
Yeah.
mostly with Liz McIntyre, because
Liz. Okay.
she was like our main technical coach, and
Hmm.
she had really been through everything because she went from being an athlete directly into coaching. Like it was because she competed in Nagano in '98, and then the next year she was on board the coaching staff. So,
Gotcha. Okay.
I learned a ton from all those people, because they had been in the USSA system a lot longer than I had, and were a little bit more familiar with that side of things. And I also think I learned a lot just from watching, um, you know, and listening to a lot of the other coaches on tour at that
Sure.
point. Des, Marco Mustonen, like because the Finns at that point, or like in that whole era, those guys, they had an amazing, amazing team. And I think that, that was one thing that we were really striving for as the US team, was to be able to have that depth and have that many people. Because, they had Yanni Latala, Sami Mustonen, Mikko Ronkainen, Laurie Lassila. Like that was and before that it was the French team, because it wasn't only Edgar, it was like Yuri Gil. They were loaded with people, and I would watch those guys, not only come to Breckenridge, but then when I got on tour, on how they operated, what they were doing, because
Hmm.
because I think the more influences you can look at, and especially looking at the other teams that were really successful, that you're always learning, and that's one thing as a coach that I always told myself, that it was like, you always need to be looking around. There's always other stuff out there, not just technically, but how people approach their training, and how it all goes. And I think that I learned not only a lot just from US team staff, but a lot from just being on World Cup and seeing what those other coaches were doing. Like I said, Des, Steve Faring, like there
Right.
was a wealth of people. And it's not like I actually worked with all those people, but just being around that level of performance, not only on the athletic side, but the coaching side, really had a big effect on my coaching career.
Hmm. Right. Just kind of being able to overhear, listen, like, ooh, that's good. Some little things you can kind of take and try and use and get as much knowledge as you can, right? It's
Yeah.
always one of those
And how
things.
people approach their training, because
Sure.
like working with a regional program, a lot of times you're out there getting as many laps in as you can, getting as much volume in as you can, and there wasn't as much, of like, okay, we're gonna, on the World Cup, you have a pretty specific plan on, as
Sure.
working with Avatar, what you want to go out and get done that day, or get
Hmm.
done first training day, second training day, how you're going to approach the comp days, everything else that goes into that. And that really contributed to my learning curve of
Hmm.
just being out there and being part of it.
Right. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, one of the big things as you go through as well that you have to deal with is the different personalities and everything as well, right? Like
Oh yeah.
it being an individual sport and everything else. I mean, it had to be a lot kind of going through guys, girls. This guy thinks he's the best. This girl thing, and kind of all those different levels. And some people you can be hard on. Some people you have to be really gentle and kind of build them up and not break them down. And so there's a lot of those different aspects that can be difficult to tread through.
Oh no, without a doubt, that's just a huge part of growing as a coach and everything, and trying to read your athletes, and figuring out what puts them in a best spot, in their best spot, and then and especially with coaching the U.S. team where you have 12 or 13 great people, like
Hmm.
great skiers, like that. There's not a lot of fall off from, say, the guys that are winning to the guy that's getting fifth place or whatever it might be.
Right.
Because I know that especially leading into like Torino in 2004, 2005 World Cup, we won 11 out of the 13 men's World Cups that year, and it was like, and like top six sweeps, like all this stuff, was kind of going on with all that.
Hmm.
And you hit it on the head of trying to deal with people, trying to deal with people who are, that guy who's in, like I said, fifth or sixth place, not on the podium. They're like, they're bummed and they're like, well, I'm getting beat by my teammates. And there was a lot of different dynamics to deal with all that
Hmm.
all the time, because
Yeah.
I mean, on those teams we had, Jeremy Bloom, Travis Mayer, Travis Cabral, like you just went down the list, Nate
Yeah.
Roberts, like
Yeah.
it just, the farther you went down it, and, we only had six people, and we could have probably had 10 people that were capable just in this country at that time of being able to get on the podium or
Yeah.
whatever it might be. So that was a huge part of dealing with all those personalities, and they all wanted the same thing. They wanted to win, and that I truly think that had a lot to do with our success, because those guys were pushing.
Hmm.
They were pushing hard. It wasn't like they wanted to beat everybody in the world. They wanted to beat their teammates that they were eating dinner with, or wherever it might be, or were traveling around the world with.
Right.
And that was really tough sometimes, without a doubt, of being able to try to like make sure everybody was getting exactly what they needed.
Yeah. No, I mean there's only so many hours in the day and there's always so much bandwidth to be able to get to each guy. And as you say, like 1 through 6. I mean, I remember, the David Babbitt one in like that time, '05, somewhere in there, and he was
Absolutely.
like the sixth guy, like kind of forgotten, but like Luke Westerland and all those guys that were all like, somewhat like afterthoughts, but still like going out and capable of winning World Cups and,
being
Dawson,
on
Bloom,
being on the
Cabral,
podium,
Nate
all of it.
Roberts. I mean, it was just a crazy, and that's just the men's side.
Right. Right. And I think that, it was, that was probably one of my biggest learning periods of my coaching career, was going through that. And then, like, going into Torino, we had such huge expectations of, like, it
Hmm.
was like, well, how, you know, who's going to be the number four when you guys sweep? I had questions like that all the time. And it was like, well, it doesn't really work that way. you
Right.
know
Yeah.
like, yeah, like you can look at all this on paper and go, yeah, okay, we had an amazing year, a great year, and all this stuff. But then, then the distractions start coming in from just stuff,
Right.
whatever it might be, whether it was,
Hmm.
people getting private coaches, people doing different stuff, even though they'd been having success and everything. And that was a whole different element to deal with there, because it's like, well, I guess we're not doing a good enough job. These guys are going out and getting their own people.
Right.
But then you have to have a thick skin, and not take that personally, because everybody has to look out for what they're doing, and put themselves in the best spot they can put them in.
Right.
So
No,
yeah,
it's one of those tough aspects of an individual sport, right? Like, I mean, I guess you have those distractions, everything. Also, I always like to kind of equate it to tennis, right? USTA has their USTA coaches, but then most of those top dogs will go out and get a, private coach or whatever else if they have the money and the funding. And it's hard, like you say, you have to have a thick skin to kind of be able to deal with it and still be able to support them, right? Because they're still on the team and they're still like in that environment, and that seems like that would be super hard to juggle. And as you say, a lot of those distractions. So, did you say that, or would you say that you learned a lot from the first games you were a part of to kind of the second and third, and kind of going through and those distractions?
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. Because it was like, because the thing was that even if somebody had a private coach, you still wanted success for that athlete, and
Sure.
they were still part of the team, and you didn't, and you still wanted success for that other coach too, because they were all people I knew, and everything else, and so like you still wanted everybody to be able to be happy with what they were doing, and get to where they wanted to go. And so I think that it was like going into Salt Lake City. I wouldn't say I was a deer in the headlights, but I had no idea what was going on, or
Right.
we had World Cups at Deer Valley and everything. Before that, so we were familiar with the site and everything. But then all of a sudden, 9/11 happens,
Mhm.
and it was like the world changed big time. Like we were at a camp in Chile when that happened, and I remember like walking. We had a day off. I was walking through the lobby of our hotel, and one of the workers there got me brought me over to the TV room, and they were like, "Oh, did you see this?" And I'm like, "No, what is this?" I thought it was a movie, and they
Wow.
were showing the Twin Towers.
Hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, you know, what's going on? We're in a foreign country, whatever." And later that day, there were military helicopters flying around the resort we were at. Like it was
Wow.
crazy, crazy stuff. And and we were all kind of down there trying to get ski camp going, and we're trying to figure out how to get a hold of our people back in the U.S. We had people that got stuck in Miami coming down to Chile. Like it was like some heavy,
Crazy.
heavy stuff going on at that point. And then by the time we got to Salt Lake, there's snipers in the woods. There's like way more security, the whole thing. So there was a lot of stuff to deal with just coming into that.
Hmm.
And then so going in, and we had a successful games there. I mean, everybody has expectations. If you don't win, it's not a successful games. But Travis Mayer and Shannon Barkey were both silver medalists.
Right.
It's a huge success. Like people don't understand how hard it is to put it together in that moment at that time, and to be able to have any sort of success.
Yeah.
And so I think leading into Torino, we'd had a lot of success. Like we'd had Nate Roberts and Hannah Carney were world champions that year before. We had, like I said, 11 out of 13 wins on the men's side. Jeremy Bloom won 6 World Cups in a row. Like it was like there was historical stuff that we were doing and everything. And I think that one of the things I learned from that is like I think that we sort of relaxed a little bit, or maybe even a little bit too much going into that, and
Mm.
didn't really keep the foot on the pedal per se, because I think we all took a big breath after that, and it was kind of like, oh, we got this.
Right.
We and going into Torino, we were like, oh, okay, how many medals are we going to win? Like we weren't talking about that as a staff, but
Sure.
there was a lot of talk about that going on. And Toby did a great job and got a bronze, but I think we all left that Olympics going, wow, we didn't get it done,
Yeah.
but if you get top 10 at the Olympics, you've done something. If you've made it to the Olympics, you've done something.
Right.
And I think people kind of forget that a little bit, of just how hard of a journey it is to even be able to step into the gate to get there.
Yeah.
And what a hard sport mogul skiing is. It's hard. Like you've been in it a long time and everything, but everything that goes in to get to any level in mogul skiing is hard. But to get to the very top and to that elite level, it's like you give up everything.
Yeah.
You essentially do, both as an athlete and as a coach. Like if you really want to do what you need to do, it's hard. You're on the road, you're chasing snow, you're as a coach, you're video building court, like just the whole thing. It's
Yeah.
so I learned quite a bit coming out of Torino, in terms of like you know we need to look at this as more of like a day-to-day thing, not and what we're doing, in terms of like how we're improving as skiers, how we're improving as this, and not, because I know coaches always talk about, well, the result isn't what this is about, but that's what you're judged on.
Sure. Yeah.
Like you are, and especially if you're running a one of the best programs in the world, like you can go, well, I thought we skied pretty good, but everybody else around there is going, well, did you win?
Right.
And that's hard. So I think that, and it was, for me coming out of Torino, there was, like I said, Toby did an amazing job there and everything. We had a lot of a lot of expectations coming out of there. But then, that next year, both, our whole staff left besides me, and I became the head coach. And
Mhm.
it was it was time to rebuild. So that was, I learned a lot from those two, and then going into the next 4 years was a completely different thing.
Now, how, I guess, talk a little bit about that transition. As you say, you have all those expectations and everything else, and now that staff's gone, and now you have new shoes to fill, and you have to rebuild and kind of reload. Obviously, a lot of that team retires and kind of moves on, but you have a bunch of, I mean, we're pretty talent rich here in the US, so there's a
Without a
bunch.
doubt.
So you have to kind of learn. And obviously, you've been given the tools over the years with your time with the ski team, but still the head coach. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of things that looking from the assistant role of like, oh, it's, I would do this or that. And then when you're finally in those shoes of the head job, probably looking around like, oh shit, I have a lot less time to do what I thought, and you're getting pulled in a bunch of different directions and everything.
No, absolutely. And that's exactly the way it was. And I was super fortunate to be able to hire some really good coaches
Mhm.
because Garth Hager, he'd been on with us part time as a NORAM coach before that. So I was able to have him on staff. I was able to have Todd Sherman on staff and Lasse Fallon, who's one of the greatest coaches in the history of the sport.
Absolutely, yeah.
Based on, just what not only as an athlete, but I mean, he was Kari Traw's coach. He was like,
It's
you know,
Walter's coach right now.
his coach, like, just all of it. And so
Sure.
I was super fortunate to, to have a really balanced staff to be able to go into the next 4 years of and each guy brought something different. Lasse, super experienced, like amazing guy. Sherm, Garth, like those guys were unbelievable with
Mhm.
what they brought to the program. And I think that, like you said, we had a lot of people retire, but we had a lot of people that came back too. Because
Mhm.
Hannah Carney, Nate Roberts, those guys were kind of really the kind of
Veterans.
became our leaders,
Mhm.
veterans, and we had and Shannon was still there, one of our leaders, one of great skier, great person, the whole thing. So I think I was lucky enough to be able to still have some people there that, even though we were rebuilding, that could, like with our other athletes, kind of show them the way a little bit,
Yeah.
because I think that you see how hard somebody like Hannah Carney works, and then you go, wow, that's the standard,
Right.
and I think if you have a couple alphas like that, then people jump on board with that, and know what the expectation of being on the US ski team is. Because I think some people make the team and they're like they're happy with that. They're like,
Right.
oh, I made my goal, and I'm like, and for me, that's just the start of what you have going on. Yeah, it's different because there is more expectations. You're putting on a coat with your country's name on it, and 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 that whole part of it adds to just the dynamic of it. And some people are happy just to get there and they don't last there very long, and some people want a lot more out of that. And like I said, I was super lucky to have a couple, a bunch of really strong athletes,
Right.
and like you said, we had a lot of people that came out of the region, and that were able to fill those shoes, or eventually fill those shoes, just because our program is so deep in the United States. Like it's amazing all the coaches and programs and divisions have done to be able to, really keep this rolling for a long time.
Hmm. No, absolutely. I'm thinking back to those the transition kind of period there, and the people that were kind of like B team or C team. Your Mike Morse, and then he comes up and he's at the next Olympics. You have Pat Deneen that comes through. You
Right.
got Brian, obviously. I mean the cupboard was definitely not bare. I remember Jay Bowman Kiergan, JBK,
Oh man.
Shokashima, Jeremy Koda. I mean there was a
Yeah.
real crew just on that men's side that came through, and then obviously Hannah and Shannon and the group of girls that were going through
Heather
too. I mean,
McPhee,
yeah, Heather fun.
Eliza, like
Yep.
there was just, and I'm trying, I should have made a list of all these people, but there were, a ton of skiers and athletes who, yeah, stepped into that role. And they knew that there was expectation of being on the US team because there had been so much success for such a long time.
Hmm.
Going all the way back to Park Smalley and when the US team basically started,
Yeah.
like that, there's a long, long history of success and great people, great skiers that, now goes back a long ways. And
Yeah.
and I think a lot of those people realized that there was expectation and that they were going to need to work hard and really pick the level of their game up to be able to keep that success going.
Hmm.
And it happened because like the year before, um I don't know, that was farther down the line, but the year before Sochi we had 33 podiums by 11 different people.
Wow.
That's unheard of. Like
Yeah.
I don't know that I don't know that it's happened since, or I know that hadn't happened before, but it was like, we had a really good, strong, driven group,
Hmm.
for all those years. And like I said, I was super fortunate to be able to, um, you know, be able to not to work, to be able to work with a bunch of great coaches, because after Sherm retired from the team in 2010, we were able to bring on Harold Marbler, one of the
Hmm.
best coaches in the world. So
Yep.
I think that, I was fortunate enough to be in the right place at the right time with a lot of this stuff.
Hmm. Now, how much do you think like I mean, obviously you're able to make those moves and make those great hires, but how much would you say your personality kind of helped um, grow the team and kind of support that competitiveness, right? Because you feel, you need to have the right personality to be able to deal with all those different personalities, right? I feel like, it's either my way or the highway maybe works with a few of the athletes, but then a bunch of the others, I mean, especially you talk about the different depth and maybe you have one person, as you were touching on, that qualifies for the ski team, and they're like, "All right, I think this is it." And then you have to go back. Well, nope. Now, now the work's just getting started. So
Right.
sorry, you got to work a lot harder if you want to, go to the Olympics or podium at a World Cup or any of those things.
Right. Well, and I think that I'm pretty even keel in my approach to coaching. I mean, you hear people talk about highs, not too highs, lows, not too lows, and I think that that's really, really important.
Hmm.
That you kind of set the tone with that, because not every year, not every week, not every day is going to be great. And I don't think you can't let those days bring you completely down. But on the great days, you can't be like going, "Oh, I'm so great," because it doesn't work that way. It's sport, and I think that that's one of the fascinating things about sports is that everybody's out there for the day doing whatever it might be, but not everybody's going to win that day. And I think that for me, I'm a glass half full guy.
Hmm.
I try to really look on the positive side of things, and sometimes that's really difficult to do. And not even just with your athlete, but with your coaching staff, because sometimes those guys don't have good days either,
Right.
and you have to recognize that and be able to, like, okay, because you know it, like you said, it is an individual sport, but we're working in a team format, and it's hard to keep everybody on the same page sometimes too, especially when you're dealing with such strong personalities.
Right.
And and people who've been head coaches
Right.
for years and years and years. Like there's a lot of things to balance with that. And I think that um, that my coaches, they did a really good job of filling their roles too. Because the one thing that was hard for me becoming head coach is I didn't get to coach as much.
Right.
Just because I think that once I took that role, I was like, okay, we need to make sure that everything else is really, really taken care of also, but that I'm not just kind of going, well, I'm going to be your coach today, but I have all these other things to do today,
Right.
whatever it might be, because
Sure.
'cause that's a really important part of it. And I think that all the coaches that I work with, they did a really good job of taking their role and really making sure that the athletes were really getting what they needed when there was stuff that I had to deal with outside of the day to day.
Hmm.
And I was super fortunate to have a lot of experienced, great people to be able to do that.
Right.
Yeah,
No, that's it. Yeah, to be able to work on what you need to focus on, but then still be able to know that everything's getting taken care of on the coaching aspect and that you trust those guys and some of those disagreements, like I think that's probably, means that you have a good staff and not a big enough ego where you're like, okay, I'm always right. It's, where you're able to have some of those back and forths and I think people don't like to talk about it too much, but I think the friction actually can be a good thing because that's where you're able to get growth. Like, all right, you
absolutely.
learn through some of those things, and this is why this coach or athlete's really passionate about this particular thing. Then you're like, okay, like you learn from it, you grow from it, and it's not always sunshine and rainbows. Some of those big growth moments are when that friction's kind of taking place, right?
Oh, absolutely. Some of the biggest ones,
Mm,
because I definitely butted heads with people, now and again. It's not really my nature, a lot of stuff, but I think one of the main things with coaching is you need to be honest.
mm,
Like you absolutely need to be honest with people and transparent about what you're doing and where you're going
mm.
with whatever it might be. Because like after a while, athletes don't want to be told they're great if they're not.
Right.
They don't like
Yeah.
it. I mean, yeah, they want to be like, oh yeah, you're so good and all this stuff. But if you're not good, you need to let them know.
Right.
And they learn from that too, and coach, and it's the same thing, even talking with your coaching staff, because it's like, well, something will come up and you're like, well, I don't think that that's exactly what we should be doing.
Hmm.
People need to be like, you know, they need to look themselves in the mirror a lot.
Right.
And that's one thing I try to do on a day-to-day basis, not just only in coaching, but in my life. And, it was interesting at the start of this year because I coached for Team Summit up in Summit County, and I mostly coach 14 and under kids. And the year before, there were some days I didn't think I was the best coach I could be.
Hmm.
Whatever it might be, whether I was not, because sometimes dealing with, especially with younger kids, it's like, if they're not going to put in the effort, why am I putting in the effort?
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
seriously, because
Sure.
some kids, they show up for ski training and it's like they've had a long week at work and or at school and they don't really want to listen or really want to learn or whatever it might be, which is fine, and so I kind of let it get to me 2 years ago, and this year I set a goal for myself to be the best coach I could be every day,
Hmm.
and I did it every day but one half day. And I'll admit that to myself because I went, like one afternoon, I was like, you weren't as good as you could have been.
Yeah.
And I learned from that. And I said, next day, you come out with everything you got. And I was super happy with that, how that went for myself this year.
Yeah.
Not giving myself a pat on the back, but it was like, I think that as a coach, you need to constantly be evaluating what you're doing and how you're doing it to not only for your own benefit, but for your team's benefit
Right.
and
Absolutely.
for the other people you work with.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's one of those things that athletes can see through. I mean, one of my big things is always just you have to be, or at least I think you have to be authentic. Like I can't
Yes.
be something that I'm pretty nice and fun and what you see is what you get. But I think that a lot of times, especially or probably earlier on, like coaching, there was times where maybe I wasn't being like truly authentic. And
Right.
so I think you got to be you, whether you're right, wrong, and different. And then the other one is communication. Like you can't fix
Yep.
problems I don't know about, and I'd always much rather over communicate than under communicate, because
Absolutely.
even with other coaches and everything else, because that's how little things that actually mean nothing can roll into big things. And 3 weeks ago, you said this one, whatever else, whether it's with an athlete or other coaches. And yeah, I think just being genuine, being authentic, and I think that leads into the trust that you slowly build over a period of time, right? Like it's one of those things that I think you have to earn. I don't think just because you've had X amount of title or whatever else that like, okay, now you just have to listen to me just because,
Yeah.
like I think
No,
having to earn that trust.
no, I think you need to earn that trust, and I also think you need to be looking forward. Like
Hmm.
regardless of what you've done in the past,
Hmm.
that's the past.
Right.
Like it's okay. Yeah, you did this and this and this. That's great, but what are you going to do next?
Hmm.
And that's really what I try to get through to my athletes now too, because it's like, well, okay, yeah, you had a really good competition that week, but last week, but what did you learn from it, and what are you going to do next?
Right.
And I think that that's really important in coaching. And like you just said, I think being authentic is maybe the most important part of this whole thing, just because you can't be somebody that you're not,
Hmm.
and you can't pretend to be somebody that you're not, because people see right through that.
Right.
Yeah.
No, definitely. I mean, I think there's been enough Patriots coaches. You look at Bill Belichick's coaching tree, I'm pretty sure everybody's trying to be Bill Belichick, and that hasn't worked out for any of his coaching tree. I think there's only one Bill because he was being authentic. The rest of them were trying to be a ripoff.
Right. Right. No, you're absolutely right. And this, and coaching, it can be a short-lived business, like, particularly like here in Denver, Mike Maloney won the NBA title 2 years ago, and he's gone.
Yeah.
And it's just like, and who knows what all went on into that or whatever it
Hmm.
might be, but it's especially at that level, it's like, whoa, okay. If you're not the champ everywhere every year, we'll find somebody else,
Yeah.
but but I think you're right. I think that being authentic and always being trying to learn.
Hmm.
Like I think that's my biggest thing still, is
Still
that
trying to learn. Yeah.
just still trying to learn just about, and where I'm at now compared to, coaching the best team in the world to coaching some 9-year-old kids from wherever, but I really enjoy that part of it, because I think that I can actually use my experience and use what I've done. And I don't bring up US team, World Cup, and all that stuff ever. Like
Yeah.
I don't, because we're here in the moment.
Right.
And
No, absolutely.
and whether, like, okay, yeah, you were this whatever, that was then, this is now. And I think that, I like you just said, I think it's important to live in the moment and to keep that rolling.
Yeah. Well, the
So
good ones will pay attention and they'll ask the
yeah.
questions and they'll know. And those are the easy ones to coach, though, because those are the ones that really want to do the video, want to get the feedback, want to actually make those changes. And you kind of, especially at a young age, right? You're really able to see that path kind of just going compared to the other kids that just don't really seem like they want to be there. And like it's like daycare or something. They're just
Right.
hanging out, kind of
and,
messing around. And
and it's kind of the thing, like you get a couple of those kids super interested, then the other kids that aren't interested get interested.
yeah,
They do real
yeah,
quick,
no,
because
totally.
they're looking at those other guys and they're going, wow, they're getting better.
Mhm.
Why am I not getting better? Well, maybe it's because I don't pay attention. Maybe it's like whatever it might be, because I'll have a group of skiers and I'll be like, go through whatever drill or whatever we're concentrating on, whatever. And, the two kids that aren't paying attention, I go, what'd I just say? Uh, oh, and then they'll come up with an answer. I'm like, I didn't say any of that. So I call them out. Like they think I'm a grumpy old man sometimes. Sometimes I am, but I think it's important.
Yeah. No, it's
Everybody's engaged. Like I don't think that, you can be engaged every second of every day.
mhm,
You know, I don't think that's probably a reasonable expectation for anybody,
mhm.
even at the elite levels. But
Yeah. Well, it's always one of those
It goes
things.
back to, fast times at Ridgemont High. Your time is my time. Whatever that quote was.
Yeah, Spicoli.
Right.
So good. Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that, especially now with how short the attention spans are, right? I mean, I always remember, at least my dad always telling me, hey, like, or Shaner or whoever we were with, if you're doing group drills or whatever it is, like, pay attention to whoever, Rick or Todd Sherman or whoever is like talking to in the group, because maybe you can use that in your own skiing. If you pay attention enough to see like, hey, this is what this, if someone else is doing video and they don't mind if you're watching while they're coaching other video sessions or whatever else, like pay attention, because maybe that's something you can use in your own skiing or something that'll get that little light bulb to go off. And then you're obviously like, boom, off to the races, making some big improvements a little bit quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Yeah. It's an amazing, amazing thing we get to do.
No,
And,
definitely.
and every day I do it now. I tell myself that, like, it's like, just being part of the ski culture and the whole thing. It's like we are truly blessed to
Mhm.
be able to do what we do.
Yeah. Well, there's plenty of times. I mean, obviously, all the sacrifice of being on the road and the travel and all that stuff. And it's fun, like talking to your friends about it when you're back home and they think like, oh my God, you're living the life. But then like, when you show up to China and nobody has any luggage and you're sleeping in an airport and everything's completely fucked up, you're like, yeah, no, no, living
Right.
on airplanes has its disadvantages too.
Right. No, and now that I'm not really doing that all the time anymore, like some of that stuff I definitely don't miss. But, I learned a ton from, like you said, you show up someplace and none of your stuff gets there, and you're just like, where do we, what are we what are we gonna do? And
Yeah.
and that stuff's out of your hands.
Right.
Like you
It's out of your hands, but that's like the coach's stress. I feel like the athletes really are kind of like, oh, like whatever, my stuff's going to show up, or but like coach, the cortisol levels like through the roof. You're not sleeping. Like, all right, we got a 3 hour drive now. How are we going to get the bags that didn't make this flight? Who wants to stay behind? Now we got to jam everybody into a different rental car. It's like all these little things that just pop up, and I'm sure you've had a laundry list like over the years of like,
Oh
oh
no,
boy,
and like especially like when I started, traveling internationally in 2001, nobody had cell phones.
oh my God.
And it was like, okay, well, I hope this person makes it, because you'd still have people traveling from all parts of the country,
Mhm.
going to wherever it is we were going, and it's like, well, hope everybody makes it. And then, I mean, you'd go hang out at the airport in Geneva for 16 hours, looking for waiting for the next flight from the U.S., going and looking through all the luggage and hoping that person that didn't make it was on that plane, and the whole thing.
Brutal.
Like it was crazy then, because it was just like, because you didn't know, and
Yeah.
there really was no communication, because it was just like, okay,
Ugh,
how,
yeah.
how are we going to do this, and like I
That's
think back to when Park was the head of the ski team. I can't even imagine without, because he only had like three coaches and 30, 40 athletes, because there were three disciplines.
yeah.
And it was like, wow, how do you do that?
Yeah, he said he was, yeah, because I had him on earlier and he said one of the check-ins at the airport, I think they were checking in like 88, 90 pieces of luggage. At one stop. That's just like, oh my God, like, all the different skis, all the different disciplines and everything, just crazy. No cell phones, none of the yeah, wild. Makes it a lot, those cell phones do make things a lot easier when it comes to that for sure.
No, it does. Well, I mean, technology is a great thing. It's in some things, without a doubt. So
Yeah.
yeah,
So, just talking a little bit about, you talk about some of those expectations in 2006. I kind of just want to go back and talk about some of those differences and how you make those changes, being the head guy kind of going into 2010. Because obviously you walk away with two medals, a gold and a bronze, or no, three medals, gold, bronze, two bronze, Shannon and Brian Wilson, and then Hannah with the gold. I mean, what was that difference kind of building through that next 4 years and the expectations? Like you say, going into 2006, people are like, all right, you're going to sweep the top four is going to be all US guys. And you said
Right.
you guys kind of maybe relaxed a little bit. Like, what would you say that difference was going into 2010?
Well, I think that part of it was it was I don't know, like it, we had some success going in there, like with Hannah particularly.
Hmm.
Like the first year I think that I was head coach, she lost the season with a concussion. Second year, she had an ACL. She blew
Hmm.
out her ACL, and so it was like, so she was rebuilding her whole thing. And then the year before the Olympics, she was World Cup champion, so there was some momentum building there. And
Hmm.
I think that a lot of it just had to do with like we're not, as me being a head coach, I'm not putting our success on podiums or whatever, because with U.S. team every year, the spring meeting, we go through this whole process of planning and everything, and they're like, well, how many podiums are you going to get, how many of this, blah blah blah. And I think that I sort of purposely didn't put that emphasis on that there was the end result that we were going to get something done.
Hmm.
I tried to focus more on the day-to-day improvement, like what do we need? What do we need to do for this athlete to keep improving? In terms of water ramping, on snow, whatever it might be. And I think that we tried to look at the details of that a little bit more. And I think that also, even at that time, or starting in that transition, we everybody would coach everybody. Even at that point, you didn't necessarily have a go-to coach. Like it was like whoever was at the bottom of the hill saw you, coached you.
Hmm.
And we individualized that a little bit more to where coaches were working more with an individual athlete to try to build those relationships more.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
I think that by the time we got to Vancouver, that had been pretty well established on that. You're coaching this person. This is your go. That was the system that we had in place a little bit more at that point. And,
Gotcha.
and I think that made a little bit more of a difference just in terms of our main go-to coaches having better relationships with those athletes and knowing exactly what they were doing in the whole thing. So, I would say that that was a bigger difference. We also established more training time.
Okay.
Both we had quite a few athletes living in Steamboat, so I lived in Colorado, so I was up in Steamboat quite a bit more of that those 4 years, and we established more of a um, weekly training in Park City at the UOP. And I think those two things probably made a bigger difference in going forward. Just that I think we delivered more consistent training as a staff, and
Hmm.
that allowed us to know our athletes a little bit better and to be able to meet their needs a little bit better.
Gotcha.
But also it's like you go into something like Vancouver, and it was like we were it was we'd already done the somewhat we did a home Olympics at Salt Lake City. Like going into Vancouver, it was easier than going to Torino, just in terms of like familiarity with the city, just being in North America where everybody spoke the language.
Right. Sure.
We were able to we didn't both in Salt Lake and in Torino, we did our own lodging. We didn't stay in the village. We did that in Vancouver. We had our own, I think that we had our own chef. We were a little bit more self-contained and kind of stayed away from the crazy at the start of the Olympics, because especially with moguls, we're always at the first 2 or 3 days of the Olympics,
Right.
and that factors into how your preparation and everything else, because you're actually training before the Olympics even start, um, and so you're having to deal with that part of with dealing with the mogul teams and everything is like, well, are we going to or athletes going to opening ceremonies. That's a grind to be able to go
Hmm.
and do that, and to be
Yeah.
able to do that. And so like in Salt Lake, we had athletes that went, they marched, and I sat in a van outside the venue, and they left so we could get them back up to Park City, back up to the thing. We did the same thing in Vancouver,
Gotcha.
especially for the women's athlete. They marched, they kept right on marching right out of the stadium to the van because we needed to get them home to work
Sure.
so we could keep preparing. So, it was like some of those smaller details like that.
Hmm.
I think we were a little bit more dialed in to what was going to go on up there.
Hmm.
And I think that, last World Cup right before the Olympics, we had, I think we either swept the podium or had three skiers in the top four, something like that. And part of that was Jen Hile wasn't there. She didn't ski the last World Cup. But I think
Hmm.
that just going into that event, that sort of gave our guys even a little bit more confidence. We had a really good pre-camp at Steamboat that everybody was familiar with. Steamboat really welcomed us, really did a
Sure.
great job in our preparation there. So I think that those were this kind of a little bit of the smaller details, like of the weeks going into the games. But I think that just leading up those 4 years, I think we were just a little bit more engaged in the process, a little bit more,
Hmm.
just in
Gotcha.
terms of providing more training, doing better, having better camps. We started going to Zermatt during that time, which we hadn't previously done that, and
Hmm.
give Lasse a lot of credit for sort of steering us that way. Of that last little bit of training at Zermatt was super important going into the year, or not, because we'd been going to Chile since 2001, so we had a good block there. But I think we spent more time on snow because we were doing camps in Hood too, also on snow.
Hmm.
So I think we did a better job of being on snow more. And I just think our preparation, I think, was probably a little bit better going into
A
that.
little bit better. Yeah. And you think that more time on snow kind of helps the overall, it seems like the overall kind of mental aspect for the athletes. So you talk about Steamboat, the pre-camp being very welcoming and it's kind of in that good vibes, I guess, environment and
Yeah,
everybody, while they're all pushing each other, they're working on those things and everybody's because I'm sure it's stressful for kind of all involved, right?
yeah. No, it's definitely stressful for all involved. But like I said, I think that we we went into Vancouver just a little bit more relaxed than I think that probably we were going into Reno. And I mean, there were expectations, but I don't know that the expectations were what they were going into Torino.
Right.
I think everybody expected us to do well, but I don't think everybody expected us to do as well as we did. You
Hmm.
know, and people really stepped up their games. They really did. Like you know, Brian Wilson, Shannon, and Hannah. They all skied at their very top end.
Hmm.
And I think that even like Heather, I felt so bad for Heather just because she had a heater going on and didn't finish her run, and
Yeah.
there were people that were right there, Pat, Nate, like that whole crew, Michelle Rourke,
Yeah.
everybody was really pushing hard, and I think that um, and I think that just our group kind of came. It's hard when you're out on the road for 3 or 4 years with everybody, and then all of a sudden there's people that aren't there because they didn't make the Olympics. That are part of that crew, part of that family, your friends,
Hmm.
and you're feeling bad for them because they didn't make it.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
that's all part of that dynamic. And I think that everybody did a really good job of coming together there, and it was we had fun, and
Hmm.
I think that is really the bottom line of all this is at the end of the day, at the end of whatever, if you're having a good time doing what you're doing, you're probably going to have success,
Right.
or more likely to have success anyway.
Yeah.
And like I said, we had a good time up there. It was great.
And then the results came, which were great as well. And then you go into Sochi, you have more success there. And then you make the transition to China. I mean, what was that? I mean, your time with the ski team ends, you take the opportunity and get to work with China. I mean, that had to be a pretty big pivot for you as well. I mean, you talk about travel, that had to be quite the gap and quite the amazing 4 year experience for you.
Oh no, that was a huge pivot from going to coaching the best team in the world to not the best team in the world. Put it that way, because
Right.
they had, I mean, mogul skiing had been, they essentially started mogul skiing after the Torino Olympics,
Crazy.
which was pretty crazy because the the people running the association at that time, um, they had greats, they had the gold medal in aerials at
Hmm.
Torino, and the mogul course was right next to it. And I talked to some of the people, and they said, well, we should be able to do this too. We don't need big, huge mountains to do this and everything else. And then Murray Clough came on with for them like in 2010. And
Okay.
he'd been coaching Jen
Hmm.
Heil and both when she won in Torino, and I don't know if he was still coaching her in Vancouver or not. I don't think he was. But anyway, I had a little bit of background. I mean, there had been a little bit of momentum growing,
Hmm.
and before I took the like I after Torino, I'd had surgery in my ankle, and I'd left the team, and I thought that was the end of the world. I was just like, oh my God, like what am I going to do?
Hmm.
Because I'd been with the U.S. team 15 years, and
Yeah.
it was a long time to be with one team doing whatever it was. And it was interesting because he had done some consulting in China with their aerial team
Hmm.
or before going into Sochi, and so he was done doing that, and he called me one day, and he's like, well, China's looking for a head mogul coach. And I'm just like, yeah, I don't know, I'm
Yeah.
like, been on the road for a while, I kind of need to decompress or whatever. And I thought about it for about a week. Then I was like, well, I should at least hear what they have to say.
Hmm.
And so I got back to him. They made me an offer the next day I couldn't refuse. Sort of thing. Like, I won't lie. I went there for, because
Yeah.
financially it made sense,
Hmm.
and so I was like, wow, and so I took the job, and I had an amazing experience over there. It was unbelievable,
Yeah.
just with kind of taking a step back and revisiting, kind of starting over with a lot of their athletes, because they had drawn athletes from aerials, trampoline, some alpine racing, some kind of all over
Interesting.
the place, and there weren't very many mogul athletes even in the country, and not even that many programs or anything else. So I went from being, to coaching Olympic medalists to starting over of just like hoping I can get people down the run. So for me, it was challenging culturally,
Yeah.
in, in terms of coaching, communication, all of it. And I loved it. It was an amazing, amazing experience, because when I took the job, I told myself that I was like, if you're going to do this, you're going to really do this. You're going to
Hmm.
like, throw everything you have into this, and go see the country, learn about the culture, learn about everything that was going on over there. And
Hmm.
I was fortunate to work with some really good people over there. The communication thing was really hard because I don't speak Chinese.
Yeah.
But I got my ski terms down in Chinese. I used an iPad a lot. I used video a lot.
Hmm.
I had a couple athletes that did speak a little bit of English, and they were super, super helpful. And
Hmm.
they were very welcoming to me to
Yeah.
come and coach their team. And I had the opportunity to show them the ski world,
Hmm.
because they hadn't really been out. Like a few of them had gone and skied World Cup and done a little bit of stuff, but at that point we started doing camps in Australia. We started going to Zermatt. We'd come to A Basin every spring for a month, like, because we had a lot of catching up to do in terms of technical skiing, just all of it.
Right.
And so we kind of had to really throw ourselves really into the whole thing. And for them, I think it was initially hard because it was like, wow, what are we, now we're doing all this skiing, we're doing all this different stuff. They hadn't traveled either, because so all of a sudden we're traveling and going to all these different places, meeting all these different people and everything. And it was cool. And like I said, they really took care of me, because I remember like our first, like, it was crazy.
It had to be just, I mean,
When I first went over there, because we did a conditioning camp in Beijing,
mhm.
and they brought in a bunch of athletes from, there were a few national team athletes and a bunch of different athletes from other places and stuff. And they were, and so we're doing a conditioning camp, and at the end of the camp, they're like, well, we're going to go up to, uh, I don't even remember the province, most northerly province in China.
Okay.
We're going to do an on snow camp, and you're going to pick the team, not by results, not by anything. You're picking the team.
You're picking the guys, girls.
I'm picking the guys and girls, and I'm like, well, so, do you guys have criteria? Do you have anything? And at that point, they really did. Like, it was like, a few people had fist points and this and that. And that's kind of what I ended up going on. But at the end of the ski camp, we're in this place, like, in China, they built cities for people to move into, and we were in Jagadachi, which is one of those cities.
Okay.
There were no people there. There was like brand new high rises and all this stuff,
Crazy.
just wild. And like,
Mhm.
we drive out, it was a government owned ski area. There was one lift, there's two lifts. The aerial team was training there. And before we left to go up there, they had told us the mogul course was built and ready, not a speck of snow on it. We got there. So we were skiing a next to the aerial hill an hour a day next to the T-bar where there was snow. And that was the first time I got to see him ski. And then we had 3 days of moguls that I got to see him ski moguls.
Wow.
And then we sat down in one room, all of us, staff, athletes, and everything. And they're like, Scott, pick the team. I'm just like, okay. So I go through my list, and they were like, we go through the list, and then everybody else had to leave. And I'm just like, wow, this is
This is
the
different.
wild. This is different. I'm in the wild, wild west now.
Yeah, that's crazy.
No,
Yeah.
it was, and but we like I said, they really. I'll never forget being up in Jagadachi, and the food wasn't great where we were at,
Hmm.
and I wasn't eating that much. I was just kind of like, okay, this is whatever. And I hear a knock on the door like 10 o'clock at night with my athletes and my assistant coach with a bunch of fresh fruit because they were worried about me. And,
Ah,
and right then and there, I was like, okay, this is cool. So
very cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, I mean,
but
I think that really speaks just how unique and really how fearless to make that kind of move. Because I'm sure there's plenty of people that are like, all right, making this big jump, don't know the language, don't know. I mean, obviously, I know mogul skiing, I know coaching. I've obviously done that at the highest level, but I mean, this is a huge, huge pivot and a big leap kind of faith that you have to make and trust in yourself and being fearless really is,
oh
there's,
yeah, I learned a lot about myself over in China those 4 years because it was like, okay, and I truly embraced what I was doing because like when we were training in Beijing, we'd have Sundays off. Every Sunday, I'd go out in the city by myself. I
wow,
got I got like a subway map, and I was like, okay, and a tourist book. And I was like, okay, you're going here today. And
very cool.
it
That's
was it
crazy.
was it was wild, and it was super cool for me just to see the growth of skiing in China
Hmm.
because I guess it was the end of my first year. We went to a resort up north in Taiwu, which was
Okay. Yeah.
north north of Beijing, which ended up. And so we had our nationals. The Chinese nationals were there, and while I was there, the people that ran the ski resort, they were like, "Well, we want to host a World Cup here. We want to do all this stuff, and we want you to ski around and see if you can find the spot." And I skied all around the ski area, and I was like, "No, there's not really anything here that is going to really like work for what we want to be." But we were sitting down at the base area, and I looked up. There was kind of some steep hills right next to coming down into the base area, and I'm like, "Well, what's up with this right up here?"
Yeah.
And so they were like, "Oh, yeah, maybe whatever." So that was in April, I guess, and so we went back for a site visit in June.
Okay.
They were just building this resort, brand new, like Whistler style resort,
Okay.
condos,
Yeah.
like the whole thing. And so it was pouring. I'll never forget this. It was pouring rain, and and everybody I was with was kind of like, but they had gotten out some topo maps and all this stuff, and I'm like, well, we need to hike up and look at this because they were
Hmm.
like, no, we can see it fine from here, and I'm like, no, we're going to hike up there or get as close as we can. We're going to actually walk up to this site and look at it, and
Hmm.
then so we leave, and I'm like, okay, whatever, and 5 months later, it was built
Wow.
because I gave them a picture of Deer Valley.
Hmm.
I said, this is what you want, and they built it.
That's awesome.
The
Yeah, and
crazy,
then it had the World Cup for a bunch of years there
yeah, we had
in
like three
Taiwan. Yeah.
World Cups there,
Hmm.
and it was like the craziest thing that I'd ever seen. Like it was like 5 months later, snowmaking, lift, lodge, like the whole deal. I mean, it was, you know, so I don't,
Yeah, that's impressive. And
yeah,
what was that Olympic experience like in kind of the end of your time there? You did 4 years there, culminated, you got a couple athletes into the games and what did you what was the difference kind of there? Because I feel like you've had each of these different like chapters, right? Go
right,
through and obviously the expectations are going to be different compared to, 2014, 2010, 2006, 2002.
right. No, it was a completely different thing. Like we had no expectations, to tell you the truth.
Hmm.
I think that the people I worked with or everything, we were happy to get people there,
Hmm.
and I think my athletes they were happy to just to be part of it, and so was I. Like I was super relaxed. Like I was just like, well, we're gonna do the best we can do here.
Hmm.
That's all we can do with this,
Right.
and it was really cool to be able to take a couple of people through the Olympics experience who probably never thought they were going to be there.
Yeah.
Because basically I had picked those skiers to be on the team 4 years before,
Hmm.
just to be on the national team, and they ended up making it.
Yeah.
And in the Olympics, it's a weird thing because all the best skiers aren't there.
Hmm.
Like just through selection, you can have your four best skiers per country.
Right.
And so it's a little bit of a weird event in terms of like some teams, like especially like with um, well, I know that what Avatal has gone through with the U.S. team and
Sure.
you have and everything else of being like, well, okay, there's a certain amount of spots, and
Hmm.
I'm still a top 10 skier in the world, but I'm not going to the Olympics.
Yeah.
That's tough business.
Right. No, definitely. I mean, you look at
It really is.
2022, you had Tess, who was what, fourth in the world or
Right.
fifth in the world and didn't end up. I mean, like every year that selection, that process, and especially those top teams, Japan, Canada, France, they have, so a lot of those top skiers will be on the sideline and everything else. So it had
Same thing happened with us in 2002 with Toby
right.
with Salt Lake. He was fourth in the world,
Hmm.
but he didn't like he didn't meet the criteria, and it was like that was tough business.
Crazy.
But anyway, it was a great experience
Hmm.
to be able to take a whole new group there and sort of see it from a different point of view of just kind of more of what the Olympics is about a little bit, you
Sure.
know,
Yeah.
and particularly that the things that really stand out in my mind was, I mean, not only the competitions and stuff, but watching both South and North Korea walk into that stadium at opening ceremonies together.
Hmm.
Like that was a moment.
Right. Yeah.
Like in the big picture of things. And I was just like, wow, this is pretty crazy to be here. So yeah.
Yeah.
So
Super,
but
super
I but
cool.
I had a great experience with that. A great time in China. And I still communicate with some of my athletes and some of my staff there, and quite a few of them are coaching now.
Oh, very cool. That's
It's
got to be rewarding too, right? You've kind of
it's
given them
super,
some
it's
of those
just
turns and that kind of career and everything.
yeah, which is super rewarding for me. So there's like I think four or five of them are running different programs in China now. So I think that's pretty great. And it would be super interesting to go back there now just to see what it looks like, because the ski culture was just starting to catch on then.
Hmm.
Because like and because around here we grow up skiing with our parents, and it's a family thing and
Sure.
whatever. And that was just starting surface at Taiwu
Hmm.
when I was over there. You would see families coming and doing ski school
Right.
and all that stuff, and like I said, my time there, it was amazing because I met at Taiwu, there were people from all over the world that came there to um, educate the Chinese on cat driving, ski patrol, ski
Interesting.
instruction. So I met people from Spain, France, all like kind of
Hmm.
all over from Europe who had been hired to come down there for the winter to train people. So it was really interesting experience all the way around.
Yeah. Well, this year they went back to Beta Lake, which I think you've been to years before that when they had the World Cup in
I never went there
you didn't go to
actually.
okay.
Like,
Okay.
yeah,
Because
like
I that supposedly is completely different and been expanded. Obviously, the last time they had a World Cup there was I can't remember 2000 right after the Olympics, I think. 2011, 10, somewhere in there. But I know just
yeah.
from talking to like Rob Kober and Harold and so, Lasse and some of those guys, just how different it was compared to, the years before, and definitely a lot of snowboarders around, and definitely like big, there were definitely some like hotels there that seemed completely vacant with like dust on them, like they were waiting for people to kind of go
Right.
in. But there was definitely a lot of people on the mountain and everything, and they supported freestyle for sure, which was yeah, it was definitely a cool experience, and it definitely better I heard than the last time at
Oh no, I heard horror stories of the first
yeah, it
World Cup
wasn't that. It
there
definitely was not
at Beta
that.
Lake. Yeah, no, I heard that it was not good. And, like I think I opted to go to selection events instead of going there. So
Yeah, no, it was definitely better than that. But a couple things that I just wanted to ask you, and was just some of those inspirations kind of throughout your career. And I know music is a huge inspiration for you. I mean, I know you
yeah.
always try to sneak in a concert or something like that along those lines. And I feel like freestyle is always connected to such good music and everything else. So I'm just curious, either musically, your inspirations coaching as an athlete. What are some of those for you?
I had a ton. Like I'm a music lover for sure. I'm super fortunate to live in Denver, and we have probably the best venue in the world. I'm going to say Red Rocks, and
So cool.
I love it so much. And it's um, so I mean that on that side of it, that's definitely an inspiration. My parents were truly an inspiration in my skiing career, just
Mhm.
because and my brothers, that really got me stuck going. And like I said, I probably love this sport as much now as I did when I started.
Mhm.
It's like I was last 2 days of day base, and we're last Saturday and Sunday, and got my last 2 days of the year in.
Awesome.
So so great, and that whole side of it. So and I think that I've drawn inspiration from just kind of everybody I've ever coached with, athletes that I've coached, people in administration, everything like we were talking about before. The freestyle community is such an amazing group of people. It really is. Like there's you know um, you you can't really describe it, to tell you the truth. And now that I'm back to coaching younger kids and seeing people kind of integrate themselves into the beginning parts of that, it's amazing to see just what goes on and how much passion and how much inspiration people have through skiing.
Mhm.
And I think that the world would be a better place if everybody skied
Yeah,
or
definitely.
snowboarded or did whatever,
Yeah.
and I like I said, like the people that I've already mentioned on the podcast here have all been great inspirations to me.
Hmm.
My wife Jackie, I would say, is probably my biggest inspiration, because without her I really wouldn't have been able to do what I've done,
Hmm.
in terms of being able to travel. And my son Zach, it's like he like I started coaching internationally when he was like 12 years old, something like that. So I was gone a lot, and
Yeah.
him and Jackie, like they freaking got it done. and
Mhm.
and I would say that those two are probably my biggest inspiration, just because I was able to chase dreams that I didn't even know I had. to
Yeah.
tell you the truth, how it all ended up, you know. And
Hmm.
so very, very fortunate to be able to do that. And yeah, widespread panics come up at Red Rocks 2 weeks from now, and
Ooh.
that's that's an annual 3-dayer. So
That'll be super cool. Yeah.
yeah,
No,
that's
it's always good
great.
to, music's so intertwined, I feel like with freestyle, right? Like at least when my kind of getting into it was punk rock was super big. I remember the Johnny DeSare 13 movies. You'd always have like Pennywise and all kinds of
Right.
different. Do you have are you open to all genres of music as long as it's good? You can
Yeah, I
listen to
am.
anything?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'll listen to anything. I'm a guitar driven guy for sure. I don't play guitar or anything, but I have a huge appreciation for great musicians,
Hmm.
without a doubt. And it's funny because like last year, even though it's not the Grateful Dead anymore, Dead and Company,
Dead and
uh,
Company.
I went to the Sphere, and part of their show was snowboarding and skiers.
Oh, that's super
It
cool.
was wild. I was just like, wow, this is pretty cool. And like you said, it's a lot of that stuff is intertwined way back when. And it's like I said, going. I'll go see anything, pretty much, because it's fun. And like you go to a show and people aren't there to have a bad time.
Gotcha. Yeah, no,
Oh,
right.
you
They're
know what I
just
mean?
there to
Like,
enjoy the music and enjoy the company
and the
and yeah.
company and whatever else goes along with it. And like very rarely do you go to a concert and people are having a bad time. And
Mhm.
that's probably one of the main reasons I like to go,
Yeah.
because it's fun. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just like
Yeah.
freestyle. It's fun.
Just like freestyle, it's fun, you know, and there's a lot of great people out there getting it done. So,
Yeah, definitely.
and yeah, I have a lot of respect for everybody that's still out there doing it. And for you too, Bobby, like it, and especially in your situation where you're actually coaching your wife,
Yeah, no, it's
that's
like
a
I was
whole,
saying, that communication's pretty key and you better be authentic there. That communication is definitely critical there for sure.
right. So, so good on both you and Avatar for doing
Well,
what you're doing,
well,
and
thank you.
congratulations to Avatar on all of her success and your success helping her get there. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it, Scott. I had so do you have a favorite athlete from your time on the US team?
No,
And
that's
just
a
so
little.
you know, I had a US athlete ask me this question because I told him you were coming on. He's like, you gotta ask Rawles who his favorite athlete was.
No, I don't, no, I'm not answering that. There's no way. No way. Everyone was my favorite, even if I didn't like you. How's that a politically correct answer?
There you go. That's perfect.
Yeah, no,
Um,
I was super fortunate to be able to work with a ton of great people, and yeah, to this day, that was a cherished part of my life and my career, without a doubt. So like I said, I didn't really expect to end up being there. Was there for 15 years, and it was an amazing ride. So
well,
yeah,
Scott, thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time. This has been awesome. So this was a lot of fun for me, and hopefully we can catch up. I'm trying to travel a little bit less after we'll get some time, and maybe I'm coming to Colorado soon. Maybe we can do a couple like in person. Hopefully set the studio up,
right,
do some in person podcasts. But I
right.
really appreciate you taking the time and coming on. This has been great.
Well, you have my number now. If you want to go see some music, hit me up.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely.
Yeah,
All right. Well, thanks, Scott.
you're welcome, Bobby. Have a great day.
All right. Bye, everybody. Hey, everybody. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if you're watching or listening on YouTube, please make sure you hit that bell button so you get notified every time a new episode drops. Thanks.